Welcome to an Odyssey in Mixology and to the third part of my segment on Old Fashions. Now, an Old Fashioned is traditionally made with bourbon, but it doesn't have to be. In this video, I'm going to make 3 unique Old Fashions that each start with a different base spirit and have flavors that you probably haven't tried before. If you haven't liked and subscribed, then please do so, but above all else, enjoy! Today, an Old Fashioned specifically refers to a whiskey drink because it can trace its history back through Prohibition and then to Jerry Thomas's 1862 whiskey cocktail. Now, before that, these types of drinks were more commonly made with different spirits and even wine. So when the Old Fashioned's history officially starts is a little bit gray, but the fact remains that different groups at different times in history have repeatedly mixed higher proof alcohol with bitters and sugars. Now, if you want to know more, then check out the first video in this segment because it's a really interesting piece of cocktail history. A classic old-fashioned recipe is usually made up of bourbon, Angostura bitters, Demerara syrup, orange, and a cherry. Now, these ingredients enhance the spiced wood, red fruit, and caramel flavor found in most good bourbons. If I swap the bourbon for gin, then it might still be an enjoyable cocktail, but the ingredients don't highlight and strengthen the flavors of the gin. So changing the recipe's ingredients to those that enhance the characteristics of the new base spirit can help you appreciate that spirit in a whole new way. It's very similar to how normal or traditional old fashions can help you appreciate the nuances in bourbon. Now, you can do this with any spirit, but gin, tequila, and rum are the 3 that I gravitate towards when I crave an old fashioned but just can't bring myself to pour another whiskey. Gin's distinctive flavor is caused by juniper berries. Now, juniper berries taste and smell a bit like pine tree needles with a little bit more citrus, and this means that most gins have a bright flavor profile. So whilst some gins will completely replace this juniper flavor or cover it up with darker ingredients, it's still their defining characteristic. So for this cocktail, I'm going to use a bright gin that keeps this flavor intact, and because the base spirit is such an important part of an old fashioned, I need to pick a decent one. Caledonia Spirits Bar Hill Gin is one of my favorite gins. It doesn't need other ingredients to be enjoyable, but it gets taken to a whole new level if you use it as the base for a cocktail. This gin is around $40 and it's distilled with honey, but it's not so sweet. It's as if the taste of unsweet honey is just peeking out between the powerful juniper berry flavors. To say this is a classic gin just isn't right because the honey adds both uniqueness and newness. But the juniper flavor is still the standout, and between these 2 flavors, it's got just the right balance of both complexity and familiarity. Now, for this cocktail, the sweetener could very easily be honey syrup to match that, but that would reduce the complexity provided by this gin, and I'd rather that honey flavor stay subtle and as it tastes in the spirit. For that reason, simple syrup or simple gum syrup is more than adequate for this old fashioned. As far as bitters that pair well with gin, there are a ton of options out there, but I'm going to stay away from those with darker flavors. In general, floral and more interesting fruit bitters work better with gin, and especially here because I'm going to garnish this with lemon. I'm also going to express a lot of the lemon oil over the top, and this goes really well with the juniper flavor, and the acidity adds to the brightness of the overall drink. For that reason, I'm going to use Bitterman's Hoft grapefruit bitters, and they taste like condensed grapefruit peel and that interesting aftertaste you get from an IPA beer. So this is both the simplest and the brightest old fashioned that I'll make today, and it's also the one that I'll drink the most, even if the tequila drink coming up next is my favorite, and the rum drink at the end is objectively more interesting. And the reason for that is very straightforward. Simplicity in a drink is sometimes incredibly important, and this takes everything that a very good gin gave and just enhances the edges of it. The juniper is still front and center, but now there's sharpness from the lemon and this really nice organic bitterness from both the grapefruit and the hops. I mean, the hints of honey come and go as I sip it, and it's a perfect combination of both fresh and crisp flavors. And by flavor alone, I would identify this as potentially a flavor, but also just an intense craft gin rather than a cocktail. And that's exactly what I'm looking for in some old fashions. They don't always have to be bursting with new flavors. Sometimes you could just enjoy the base spirit. And the taste of this is of a new, more flavorful gin, and the smoothness is that of a cocktail. And again, different gins might warrant changes. A gin without the honey influence from Bar Hill will benefit from a bar spoon of honey syrup. Gins with darker plant flavors might need more floral bitters to rebalance them, but for this cocktail, what I have is simple and frankly perfect. It's very hard to make a simpler, multi-ingredient cocktail than this gin old fashioned, but that doesn't reduce how enjoyable it is to drink. The bright juniper forward gin, dark grapefruit peel and hops, subtle honey, and sweet sugar makes for a very refreshing combination. Sometimes I'll even garnish this with rosemary after squeezing the lemon oils in. It just adds some interesting herbal flavors. Regardless, it's a great drink to easily throw together and appreciate the clean flavors of your favorite gin. If you've ever watched any of my past videos, you might know that Mezcal and Sotol are my favorite spirits, but that tequila holds a close third place. And because the three most common tequila varieties are Blanco, Reposado, and Añejo, each depending on their barrel aging process, there are just a lot of different old fashions I can make with each of these. Now, the darkest Añejo tequila can be subbed into bourbon old fashioned recipes with ease, but Reposado tequila doesn't get as much love as it should. So this is an old bottle of Milagros Select Barrel Reposado tequila that I bought about 8 years ago. The modern version has a far less cool bottle, so this one just gets topped up with the new as it's needed. Milagro has good budget tequila, even if there are better alternatives out there that stand by additive-free statements. I still like Milagro though, and I think this is one of the best bottles in their range. Reposado tequila is barrel-aged, but usually not for a long time and generally for under a year. Now, this low duration doesn't allow for the deep aged flavors you'd see in an Añejo tequila or some whiskeys to develop. This barrel impact is still here though. It does still change the spirit. You usually get light to medium wood, subtle caramel, and spices, and that kind of means that the extra ingredients I add to this cocktail can be either dark or light in flavors. Now, personally, I've always felt that tequila goes best with spice, and not just heat spice, but also baking spices. And for this next old fashioned, I'm going to start with 2 ounces of my Reposado tequila, followed by 2 bar spoons of Almatepec's Pasilla chili liqueur. Almatepec is one of my favorite liqueurs, and Ancho-Reyes will work here. It is the more common spicy liqueur. The difference though is that Almatepec has a less syrupy and much more dry flavor and consistency. It works really well in a cocktail like this that has generally low volume, so each ingredient stands out a little bit more. Now, the reason I'm using 2 bar spoons is that this gives me a subtle chili flavor that I want. It also gives me a little bit of a kick, but not enough to make this an overall spicy drink. Next, I'm going to add 1 dash of Guacalotl bitters by Bittermans. Now, these are made of dark cocoa and cinnamon, but if you ever had mole before, then this is the liquid form of that flavor. These enhance the baking spice and the wood flavor already in the tequila, as well as the chili spice from the Almatepec. Now, for the sweetener, I'm going to add 1/4 ounce of agave nectar. This doesn't take a lot of explaining. Tequila and agave nectar are a match made in heaven. And then the final ingredient to this drink might be a little bit surprising because it's definitely not standard and not generally something you would see in most tequila drinks. And that ingredient is red peppercorns. Now, red peppercorns are a little bit polarizing as an ingredient goes because of their really, let's say, obnoxious flavor. But in this case, I'm going to use 3 dried red peppercorns. I'm just going to let that infuse in the glass for a few minutes. These are really nice for a few different reasons, but in general, they work really well in spicy cocktails that aren't really supposed to be that spicy. Peppercorns are hot, but these dried red ones have some fruit and citrus flavors in addition to an extremely bitter and spiced aftertaste. In small quantities, they make for an incredibly interesting and physically tingly flavor in some drinks. Now, I do have peppercorn bitters, and I do enjoy using them, but for this kind of cocktail, I prefer to let a few dried peppercorns just infuse for a few minutes. Now, any longer and the drink can become too flavored by them, but there's a point where the subtle flavors these impart tie the tequila, the bitters, and the liqueur together a bit more than they already are. They add more overlapping depth to the already existing flavors. For the garnish, I'm going to cut a slice of orange and then cover it in chipotle powder. Now, unlike a normal old-fashioned where it's important to let the peel add oils to the drink, for this drink, they need to remain separate. So this is the completed drink, and right off the bat, the liquid portion smells like intense reposado tequila. The chipotle orange is mostly there for the aroma, but eating it after a sip is a perfect combination of flavors if you can stand the sharp heat from the chipotle powder itself. This is a bit different than the gin cocktail I made a second ago, but it does the same kind of thing. Whilst I am adding new flavors in here, there's still flavors that are similar enough to the base spirit that it feels like it's enhancing the base spirit rather than bringing a whole bunch of new stuff in. Now, overall, this is such a light and spirit-forward cocktail, yet it has darker flavors and it is more complex than you realize after the first sip. One of the other interesting things about this cocktail is that you can pick out the peppercorn flavor in here. It is a bit of an acquired taste. In fact, I hated using peppercorns when I first started using them, but at this point I quite like them, especially in moderation. Now, they add both a bitter spice, but also a spice that is a little bit more akin to black pepper than chili pepper, and they have this sourness to them, which by themselves is horrible. But again, in moderation is really nice. Without them added into this drink, it tastes more tame, and that's not a bad thing, but with them, it's more interesting. The combination of the peppercorns with the almatepec causes that chili spice to stand out and be more intense without actually adding heat to the drink. And from that standpoint, I think it's really good. This Tequila Old Fashioned has notes of dark chocolate, baking spice, wood tannin, and dusty chili pepper. Each of these flavors enhances the reposado tequila's natural flavor, but only subtly. It's a complex drink, but not intense, so some of the nuances are a bit hard to pick out. The peppercorns add a love it or hate it aspect to the drink, and the low sugar means that this falls on the sharper side. All in all, that means this is not a drink to make you love tequila, but it is a drink to help you finish that one bottle of reposado that's not a mixer, but also not your go-to sipper. And that of course brings me to the final old fashioned of this video. Now, like tequila, rum comes in all forms, and to keep the progression of these drinks, I've chosen a dark rum to be the base. Now, this isn't just any dark rum though. Equiano's dark rum is a blend of African and Caribbean rums aged in both ex-cognac and ex-bourbon barrels. It's sweet but additive free, and it manages to balance the barrel influence with a dried fruit forward and distinct smooth rum flavor. This is easily one of my favorite finished rums on the market. The taste is very raisin and baking spice forward, but the heavy wood influence from both the cognac and the bourbon barrels reminds me more of a whiskey, and unlike some Jamaican rums, this isn't funky. It can be a direct replacement for bourbon in most normal old-fashioned recipes. Instead of doing that, I obviously want this final drink to highlight those tropical flavors, and luckily with dark rum, that's very straightforward. A dark rum is easy to combine with tropical and specifically tiki ingredients because of its default fruitiness, spice, and sweetness. Now, one of the most common tropical spices to add to dark rum is allspice. And I like an allspice like that found in St. Elizabeth's liqueur to kind of a natural fruity bubblegum flavor. And a spoonful of the St. Elizabeth allspice liqueur can take this rum cocktail in a wonderful yet very odd direction. Adding even a bar spoon of allspice liqueur to this cocktail is enough for that flavor to take hold. It is a very strong flavor, so that also means I don't want to go too crazy with the other ingredients. Now, for the sweetener, I'm going to stick with just a simple Demerara syrup. It's dark and the molasses note doesn't add new flavors, even if it highlights some of the existing ones in the rum itself. So choosing the bitters is a bit more complicated. I obviously don't want to go too crazy, but dark rum can go with everything from lavender bitters to aromatic bitters, to even darker ones like those with coffee, tobacco, and chocolate notes. And what I'm actually going to do here is draw out the allspice so that it blends in a bit better with the rum's raisin and spice notes. Now, to do that, I'm going to use tiki bitters from Santa Teresa and Bitter Cube, but I'm going to use less because of the inclusion of the liqueur. Now, these bitters are a blend of various different tiki ingredients, including ginger, more allspice, grapefruit, vanilla, eucalyptus, and a few different types of barks that bring a really nice heat, warmth, and additional darkness to the cocktail. The other common tiki bitters I have are from Bittermans, but I find them to be a little bit brighter, and I think this cocktail benefits from tiki bitters that are a little bit darker. Now, right now, this makes a cocktail that is both dark and fruity, with not so subtle bubblegum flavor from the allspice. It's really good, but to make it truly pop, I'm going to add a little bit of absinthe to it. Now, this spiced licorice flavor from the absinthe takes the bubblegum and turns it into something a little bit new. The flavor becomes deeper, more drawn out, and even more interesting. Now, to match that, the garnish will be star anise to highlight the wood from the rum, the bark flavors from the bitters, and now the funkiness from the absinthe and the allspice. So unlike the other two drinks that create more expressive and intense versions of the base spirit, this one adds new flavors to that spirit. And it's an objectively better cocktail because it has more complexity, and as great as gin and tequila are, there's just something right about an old-fashioned with dark flavors. This is a really incredible, full tropical aroma. It kind of touches on fruit, wood, vegetation, spice, and of course that molasses note that is so distinct from dark rums. The rum really is the carrier for all of these different flavors. And unlike some of the other old fashions, the focus is not just on the rum. The bubblegum and anise flavor works with the rum rather than for it. And overall, this drink is better because of that teamwork. It's also got a bit of a peppermint flavor, which when I first made this drink, I was very surprised by how well that went with the darker flavors. Now, what makes this combination nice is that Nequiano rum isn't funky by itself. The bourbon and the cognac influence on the blend means this is a very good rum, but it's not very exciting by itself. So making a cocktail out of it and adding absinthe and allspice and the tropical complexity from the bitters takes this very controlled spirit and makes it very fun. You can taste it in here. It's not a simple flavor, but it's very enjoyable to drink and very rich in its sweetness and dried fruit notes. This Rum Old Fashioned is, in my opinion, the perfect balance between a traditional Old Fashioned and a highly flavored mixed drink. The flavors are tropical and intense, but still grounded in the dark bourbon barrel influence. It's complex, but not overly so. This is an incredibly smooth cocktail. In part, that's due to an incredible rum, but also because of the natural sweetness of most of the ingredients. If you're looking for a tiki-flavored drink without the bright fruit, or you want to step out of your whiskey comfort zone, then this is well worth a try. So, is there a single takeaway from these three drinks? Yeah, absolutely. A traditional old-fashioned elevates bourbon, and you can apply the same thought process that created the bourbon old-fashioned to any spirit you want. A generic recipe of 2 ounces of spirit, a 1/4 ounce of sweetener, and 2 dashes of bitters on ice can be the starting point for just about every old-fashioned, regardless of spirit type or complexity. A bar spoon of different liqueurs, some minor infusions, and a bit of creativity can really improve the final cocktail, but they're not always needed to enjoy it, as evident by this wonderful, simple gin old fashioned. That's it for my video on making new and creative non-whiskey old fashions. In the final video of this segment, I'm going to go whiskey hunting in Sarasota, Florida to try and find something new that I can make another original old fashioned from. If you like this video, then please like and subscribe, but as always, thank you so much for watching. Cheers!